Before we descend into tonight's darkness, I need to know something. Where are you watching from right now? And more importantly, what time is it where you are? Because the hour matters. Midnight in Paris is not the same as midnight in New York. Some hours open doors, and some hours close them forever. So tell me in the comments below. Are you safe in your bed, lights off, headphones on? Or are you somewhere you shouldn't be, watching this when the veil is thinnest? Hold that thought, because once we begin tonight's story, there's no turning back. Imagine kneeling before the oracle, the smoke of burning laurel choking your lungs, and hearing a voice that didn't sound human. Some said it was prophecy, others a curse. The truth was far darker. Rain fell in sheets on the broken columns and stone blocks. I stood on the ancient ground where Agamemnon, Socrates, and Cicero, among others, had humbly stood, hoping to get answers to their big questions. I was alone outside the ruined temple of Apollo, where for more than 1,000 years the Oracle of Delphi enigmatically answered the questions of curious pilgrims, including kings, generals, and philosophers. Now she was silent. But Zeus wasn't. Thunder shook the ground. Above me loomed the rain-darkened Phaedriades, or bright ones, twin broad-shouldered limestone cliffs that framed the sacred hollow where the temples, stadiums, and shrines of Delphi were built. Once the hub of the religious life of the Greek classical world, Delphi, on a late afternoon in April last year, played host to one wet tourist and several bored security guards.
I had arrived by bus from Athens at about 1 p.m. with the mistaken assumption that guides would be lined up outside the gates of the ruins, just waiting to interpret Greek history. There weren't any. So I went back to my hotel in modern Delphi and spent a couple of hours consulting the internet and the phone book. I learned that there are 4 guides in Delphi who don't work full-time for bus tour companies. And for the next 3 days, Orthodox Easter weekend, they were working full-time for the bus tour companies. From what I knew of the Oracle, this situation wasn't unusual. Getting information here historically was never easy. The cautionary inscription, "Know thyself," greeted every traveler who crossed the threshold of the Temple of Apollo. The Oracle's responses to questions, especially for the unprepared, were often caustic or misleading. So perhaps this made sense. I would have to learn what I could on my own. The next morning the skies cleared. It took only a half hour to walk from my hotel at the western end of town to the ruins on the eastern side. The modern town of Delphi consists of several narrow parallel streets stepping up the side of Mount Parnassus and overlooking the spectrally blue Gulf of Corinth. Hotels, cafes, and shops selling postcards and plaster busts of Greek gods align tightly along those precarious lanes. The new town has been around for about a century. After Greece converted to Christianity roughly 1,700 years ago, zealots knocked down the temples of the pagan gods. A new town with a different name was built over the ruins, and Delphi was willfully forgotten. When French archaeologists finally got permission to excavate at the turn of the last century, they had to move the whole village down the road a mile to get at the ruins. I was the first person through the gates at 10 a.m., and I walked up the stone path known as the Sacred Way, which was still shiny from the night's downpour. Even if I hadn't been told that this was a sacred place, I could see why it might be. The landscape's epic beauty is humbling. Built into a cleft on Mount Parnassus 2,000 feet over the sparkling Gulf, the temple complex presents a stunning view in every direction. According to legend, Zeus loosed 2 eagles with instructions to find the center of the world. This cleft in Mount Parnassus is where they alighted. By 11 a.m., bus tourists and guides swarmed the ruins. I surreptitiously edged in on the groups when I could, pretending to look at the dry signage by various landmarks while I eavesdropped on the guide's patter. The snippets I picked up varied in quality. Delphi's athletic games were second in importance to those at Mount Olympus, explaining the various stadiums and theaters, and in the attached museum, the many statues of muscular champions. Poetry and singing contests were among the most competitive and well-attended events, foreshadowing the American Idol phenomenon by more than 2,000 years. Gymnasium means school for naked exercise. Athletes practiced and competed nude. This was why women couldn't attend the events. The stones on the various structures are covered in inscriptions. Most of the inscriptions are deeds, contracts, and the transfer of ownership of slaves to Apollo, in other words, giving them freedom. The Greek guide told his elderly British patrons that slavery was a common outcome for vanquished soldiers and citizens in ancient times. When Rome began winning battles with Greece, many of the educated prisoners of war became tutors to Roman children, he said, while eyeing me suspiciously. Thus it is said that while Rome conquered us by arms, we conquered them by brains. You're not with this group, are you? I bought a guidebook and dutifully visited every monument and site in the expansive archaeological park. At its pinnacle, Delphi was a large temple town, with hundreds of gilded statues, colorful shrines and towering monuments lining the stone road that switchbacks up the side of the mountain. There would have been shops, restaurants and places to stay. It takes some imagination to see that great ancient precinct while looking at cracked foundations, partial columns and tilted pedestals. But much remains vital. The Castalian springs, where the oracles drank holy water, still flow. The rock of the Sibyl, a boulder where an early prophetess predicted the Trojan War, stands where it always has, and the well-preserved stadium, where games rivaling the Olympics played out, could still seat several thousand spectators. But the ruins of the Temple of Apollo kept drawing me back. This is where the pivotal episodes in Delphi occurred. This was where history was made, and this is where the most secrets remain. Historical accounts produce agreement on some simple facts. Inside the temple, the oracle occupied a small inner sanctum where she would sit in a metal bowl on a tripod and enter a trance state, awaiting pilgrims. Petitioners had to pay a small fee and sacrifice an animal to ask one question of Apollo. The divining days happened once a month during the warmer months. The oracle wasn't one woman but many over the years. Most women acting as oracle, also known as the Pythia, had been married and had grown children but had to renounce family life to assume their mystic duties. The wisdom passed down by the oracles was never as simple as it seemed. The Temple of Apollo at Delphi was inscribed with 3 maxims: know thyself, nothing too much, and make a pledge and destruction is near. They are indicative of the kind of insight the oracle offered. Her pronouncements were most often puzzles, challenging the receiver's intellect and soul. The first of the maxims is the most famous and perhaps the most challenging. Socrates put it this way: isn't it obvious that people derive most of their benefits from knowing themselves and most of their misfortunes from being self-deceived? The most famous example is that of King Croesus, who asked the oracle whether he should wage war on Persia. The oracle said, "If you attack, a great kingdom will fall." The king assumed it would be his enemy's loss and he attacked. He lost the battle and it was his kingdom that fell. Socrates himself received a vexing pronouncement from the oracle when a friend of his asked the mystic source at Delphi if anyone was wiser than Socrates. The answer: no man is wiser.
Socrates suspected the answer had hidden meanings and spent the rest of his life trying to find someone smarter than he was. He aggressively and publicly questioned supposedly wise men and leaders of Athens to test their knowledge against his own. In each case, Socrates found, those who considered themselves geniuses considered themselves infallible, too. Socrates said he wasn't the better man because he was smarter, but because he knew his knowledge was limited. Just the same, he offended many rich and powerful men, and he was put on trial for corrupting the youth of Athens with his heretical attitude. His brilliant self-defense in that trial was recounted by his student, Plato. "The truth is, O men of Athens, that God only is wise," Socrates said. And in this oracle he means to say that the wisdom of men is little or nothing. Even this didn't save him. He was sentenced to death, not for the stated cause of corrupting youth, but for challenging authority and inspiring that spirit in others. After a day and a half of lurking around bus groups, I got bored. A diversion appeared in the form of a friendly British hiking group I met on the road between the town and the ruins. They invited me to join them on a 10-mile hike down the mountain to the port town of Pythia the next day. We would be walking the pilgrim's path. Most of Delphi's visitors would have come by sea and walked up the hill to the sacred precinct. Spring never seemed more glorious. The rain-washed grass shone, and stop-sign red poppies bloomed on patches of open ground. The footpath meandered through ancient olive groves, adorned with new silvery green leaves. When we arrived in Pythia that afternoon, I looked back toward Delphi, a tiny cluster of buildings partway up the slope of that mile-high mountain. Arrivals from all over the ancient Greek world would have seen a similar sight and been braced for their own encounter with the oracle. It seemed to me that the particulars of human life have changed in the past 3,000 years, but not the dilemmas faced by individuals. The wisdom of the oracle is current. It's no easier to know oneself now than it was then. Ideologues are just as dangerous and foolhardy, following their egos into battle like dogs chasing their own tails. Innocents still die as a result. The sun was out and it wasn't a day for philosophizing. A taverna owner set up a long table by the beach and served us beer and soft drinks, olives, fresh bread and tart feta cheese. We ate and drank and for the day left the big questions to others. And so, the shadows close once more. If you made it this far, it means you've walked through the dark with me, and survived, at least for tonight. Before you go, tell me in the comments. Did you listen in the safety of light, Or did you dare to drift into sleep with only the whispers of the past beside you? If this tale unsettled you, imagine what awaits in the next one. So, subscribe, leave your mark with a like, and keep your lantern ready. Because in this channel, the dark never sleeps. And neither should you.